So how many of us have ever had a biopsy? Hey, all right, we have a club here. Didn't know that. All right, yeah, good. So biopsies range from like, oh, that wasn't bad, to holy cow, that hurt. I had my first one when I was in 8th grade. I was having some severe stomach issues. I knew what was causing it, but I couldn't fess up to it. So I spent my only night in the hospital, other than when I was born, as they were poking around and doing a bunch of things. So that was my introduction to biopsies, and it was something that I was glad to put in the rearview mirror for most of my life until I started making my dermatologist a very rich lady. So wouldn't it be great, though, if they could create a technology, and not if, but perhaps when they can create a technology to find out whatever's wrong inside of us without having to invade our bodies in a painful way. And likewise, then, wouldn't it be great if there was a way of doing like a biopsy of our soul? We could know whether or not our heart was in a good place, whether or not, what's the condition of my heart. You know, I think that's been invented. It's called the internet, okay? Because the internet can be a really dark place to go, and it can bring out the worst of us. We hear, or perhaps you've experienced, how mean and violent people can be out there. And we keep hearing, oh, the internet's the problem. Friends, the internet is not guilty. The internet is neutral. The internet, I would suggest, is simply a biopsy of the human soul. It's giving us a platform where what's inside of us can get outside. So a good while back, I put a comment on what was then called Twitter, and I thought it was innocuous, meaningful, yes, but in my mind, neutral. You know, how could anyone hate this? I said I was pained by the loss of life of the children in Gaza. I mean, we know it was thousands and thousands of children. And what I said was, you know, these kids, they don't understand political situations. They don't understand national borders or boundaries. But they do know fear, and they do know bombs. And wow, did I find some haters, you know? I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised, but what I'm concerned about is how the internet reveals to us where we are as a culture. See, what really is making me more than a little bit nervous is that the things we once thought were just aberrations are quickly becoming the norm, and as a society, we seem to be pulling each other down further and further. So what I want to talk to us this morning is simply, let's call it reclaiming our humanity. Because somewhere along the way, there has to be someone who says, you know, I'm not going to let you pull me down. I'm going to spend my life working at pulling others, pulling everyone up. So I, for one, keep being pressed by many of the words of Jesus. Some of them are disturbing. And I suspect if we're able to admit it, that there are words of Jesus that just don't set well with us. They're like, ugh. So here's some. These words of Jesus. I find them as disruptive today as when I first encountered them. Now they're beautiful. They speak to us in lofty terms. They're idealistic. But they do not scream, hey, you can do this. So Matthew 5, beginning in verse 38, Jesus says, and I'm going to read it slow because I want the needle to go in slow. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say you don't resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, you go with them 2. Give to the one who asks you. Do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. And you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He who causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? That's what the tax collectors do. What if you only greet your own people? And if you only greet your own people, what are you doing more than others who don't? Even the pagans do that? So be perfect, therefore, as your Father is perfect. So I want to have a few moments together, because what Craig read was great, but I think these words, it takes a while for them to sink in and penetrate. So the context, these words are so beautiful, so poetic, that I think that we could get lost in them because they seem so far out of reach. And I suspect that there's all been times where we've heard the words of Jesus and think, that's really cute, that's really lovely, but there's no way I could ever live them out. And so what do? I think we rationalize it. First off, we might say, we're tempted to think, that was then and this is now, Jesus. Or secondly, we could think, Jesus was speaking in hyperbole. Or third, we might say, if Jesus was here today, he'd sing a different tune because, man, this world has gone to you-know-where in a handbasket. So I want us just to take a step back and think about the context of these words. A casual reading of the Scriptures, we might think that the Scriptures were written by a free people who talked about slavery, but the Scriptures were actually written by slaves who had the audacity to talk about freedom. It's easy for us to forget that when Jesus was born, the Hebrews were captives. Gene alluded to this, captives to the Romans. The nation of Israel had been conquered. They weren't free. Jesus had never known freedom in his life. Just think about that. Jesus spoke into a world where he and his people were the oppressed. So let's not think for a moment that what Jesus is saying doesn't have any relevance for today. And he uses this phrase over and over again. You've heard that it was said. You've heard that it was said. You've heard that it was said. And actually what he's doing, he's addressing the common cultural understanding. Those things said on the street. Or in today's vernacular, the things that get tweeted anonymously. The things that people say because they're behind a firewall. Those things that people are able to say because, you're so bold because we don't even know who you are. You've heard it said, but I say, you've heard it said, you've heard it said. The type of thing that if you were having a face-to-face conversation with someone, you probably wouldn't say it that way. See, this is the conversation behind the conversation. This was the biopsy of you, if you will, of the soul. The word on the street was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. What you're all saying, Jesus is saying, is that there's only one way to get ahead in the world. It's the same way that the world has gotten ahead. What Jesus is saying is, you bought into the lie. That you can only fight darkness with darkness, evil for evil, hatred with hatred, violence for violence. He said, and what you're saying behind closed doors is revenge is acceptable when you're facing violence. You got to be like them if you're going to beat them. Isn't that what's happening in our culture? Instead of elevating, we just keep tearing down. Instead of choosing a higher way, we get dragged down into the muck. We get dragged down into the gutter. But Jesus says, I tell you, don't resist an evil person. And then Jesus begins to give them a path to reclaiming their humanity. And so that's the path that I want us to take together. He says, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm in trouble already. He got my attention. I mean, I'm not built that way. I took 3 years of college kind of mixed martial art training, and the whole idea was you don't let them hit you. I mean, and if they hit you, I failed. And so I'm going to let them hit me once and then turn around and then willingly let them hit the other? No. But see, that's what I love about Jesus. That's why I follow that guy. That's why I'm willing to follow you. I'm just not willing to step into this because I live in the real world where there are people trying to hurt me, or people who don't understand me, or people who don't have boundaries. So to be clear, Jesus isn't saying, this is really important, that you should choose to be a victim. And what he's not saying here is that you should ever choose to be a willing object of abuse. But what he is saying is that you need to discover the strength of forgiveness. What he is saying is, look, the moment someone offends you, you need to discover that strength of forgiveness. The moment someone hits you, offends you, hurts you, turns against you, your natural reaction is going to be retaliation. All right? Can we get an amen to that? And I want to teach you a different way. And so when he says, someone slaps you on the cheek, give him the other, what he's actually saying is, you don't want to become like them. Because the moment you become like them, they've won. Now, there are a lot of ways of getting slapped in the face, and most of the time it's not physical. I mean, how many times you've been betrayed, hurt, let down? Has someone broken their promises, broken their word to you? Someone said that they're going to love you forever, and forever came to a quick end. Whenever you fight bitterness, whenever you find yourself all of a sudden carrying an offense, you've been slapped by the cheek, you now have to decide, what am I going to do with it, right? Am I going to let them get away with that? Will I let them think they have that much power over me? And fight or flight kicks in, and fight often wins. So what can I do to retaliate? So on a macro level, we see that our culture degrading, accusations, demonizing each other and diminishing each other. Oh, it's just so sad. But on a micro level, we hear this language all the time. I can't believe they said that to me. I can't believe they said that about me. I can't believe they did that. Well, let me let you in on a little something if you don't know it. The game of life is like bumper cars. People in life are going to bang into you. Did you ever think that maybe you're too fragile? As I said, I had to do some real soul searching. As I mentioned last week, my guide was like busting my chops every time we'd go in. You know, they'd have some, you know, I could just say, you know, I don't speak Vietnamese, you know, so I could tell what he was saying was making fun of me because I was burning out this clutch and everything. And so I really did ask myself, okay, you know, am I just too sensitive about this? So I did. I had to consider if this hurts, well, maybe I'm just being too sensitive. Maybe I'm just being too fragile. See, one reason we become fragile is because we don't know the power of forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't make us weaker. Forgiveness makes us stronger. Forgiveness is a strength. So as a freshman in college, still new to the faith, I'm still learning about Jesus, didn't know a lot, reading the Bible, stumbling onto this kind of teaching. You know, if they slap you on the cheek, turn the other cheek. I had a roommate named Jim. He was so messed up. I tried hard to really like him, but I was so new to be a Christian. I was just trying my best, but it didn't help. His side of the room, you know, looked like a pharmaceutical store, and he was, you know, stoned most of the time, and, you know, my money would go missing, some of my food would go missing, and I kept turning the other cheek, the other cheek, the other cheek, the other cheek, you know. But I only got 4 cheeks, you know, and he slapped all of them. But I don't know why, but this really sent me over the edge. One day I noticed that Betsy's picture was missing. Oh, I found it. It was in his stuff. He's probably as high when he took it. I don't know. Well, I just lost it, And I was not going to express to him unconditional love and acceptance. He'd crossed a line, and that was a line not to be crossed. Well, fortunately for both of us, he'd gone home for the weekend. By the time he came back Monday, I'd settled down. And I remember telling him Jesus had saved him. And he didn't have any idea what I meant by that. I was like, well, I'm not going to do what I want to do because Jesus has saved me. He's also saving you. See, one of the frustrating things about Jesus is that he calls us to a path that we cannot walk without him. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. So first off, we need to learn the strength of forgiveness if we're going to reclaim our humanity. And then Jesus continues. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. Again, maybe it's just me, but that's a problem. See, that's not easy, nor easy as the last one. So if someone wants to sue you, they're out to harm you. And Jesus says, well, that's, as far as I'm concerned, Jesus, that was easy for you to say. You don't have anything, right? He's the guy who had nothing. So easy for you to say, just give them whatever they want. Right, but Jesus is wanting us to understand generosity. You see, those young Hebrew boys, those men, those Israelites who were the son of David, who killed Goliath, that's the lineage there, right? They would have Roman soldiers walk up to them indiscriminately while they were with their friends and their ladies and their family, and they would come up to them and slap them on the face. They'd try to get them, into something. And if they responded, well, that would just allow the soldiers a violent response, right? So I know it's hard to imagine a world in which those who are entrusted with justice are the instruments of injustice. Hard to imagine. But go with me there. It's hard to imagine a world where the power is given to people because they're of one nation or one color or one ethnicity, and they in turn oppress and dehumanize another people just because they were born of a different blood, a different race, a different color. Imagine that, but go with me there. Because if you ever step into that world, you might need the teachings of Jesus. See, Jesus says not only do you need the strength of forgiveness, but you also need the wealth of generosity. Because what would happen is that these Romans would come up to them. They'd see a bunch of Israelites together, and they'd try to incite them to violence. And he would say, my horse is old, Hebrew. I need your shirt. I like that shirt. See, because the Romans saw everything the Hebrews owned as theirs, they actually saw the Hebrews as theirs. Can you imagine having your best shirt on, you're walking along with your fine lady, and this Roman soldier comes along and says, give me that shirt. And every time you unbuttoned, every button, you just felt more and more dehumanized. And you said, you're all high and mighty up on that horse. Why don't you come down off of that horse? Just give me just 5 minutes, just me and you. No sword, no spears, no nothing. Just you and I. Oh, and your 10 friends right there, they got to stay out of it as well. Just give me 5 minutes and we'll get this squared away. And Jesus is saying, no. See, it's not like that. That's not what Jesus would do. Jesus said, when they want to take your shirt and you feel powerless, I want you to give them your coat as well. I don't have one of those on. And you can't have my shirt. You don't have the swagger to carry this shirt. Jesus is saying, no. You say to them, here you go. I was hoping someone needed my shirt today. But wait, before you go, I'd like to give you my coat as well. It's a really nice coat. But clearly you need my coat more than you do, but that's okay. because God's made me a man and I can handle the elements. See, we're called to learn the wealth of generosity. And then in verse 41, Jesus says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. See, these Roman soldiers, they'd ride up on their horses, they'd be carrying their packs, and they had the authority to call out a Hebrew and say, you, Hebrew dog, you're not doing anything meaningful. My horse is tired. My horse is tired carrying this pack. I need you to carry it. So can you imagine how much hatred would begin to stir in your heart every step of the way? Hand you that pack. Yeah. He says, you feel so powerless. He said, but I want you to know there's a strategy where no one can ever steal your power. When you think you've come to the end of that mile, when you've come to the end of that mile, that Roman thinks he's abused you and made you powerless. And he says, all right, Hebrew dog, you can put that pack down. After you get that last step of that last mile, and you're there to show them you were never their slave. You were always free. And that last step of that last mile, look at them and say, no, I got this. Your horse still looks tired. I'm up for another mile. Bring it on. I can't even imagine stopping right now. This just feels good. Oh, I understand why you would need to think I need to stop, but I'm not Roman. See, I don't live a life of obligation. I live a life of intention. I'm not doing this because you have power over me. I'm doing this because you are powerless over me. And Jesus says, look, the only way you're going to reclaim your humanity is if you discover the strength of forgiveness and the wealth of generosity. You need to understand the freedom of servanthood, because the moment you choose the path of humility, you can never lose your humanity. The moment you choose the path of humility and servanthood, no one has the power over you to diminish you. And when someone says, what's wrong with you? You should work harder. Okay, I will. You know, many times in my life, I've been demeaned, I've been diminished, and it would have been so easy to accept it as my identity, but instead I used it as fuel to say, yeah, I'm going. So I had a job at a warehouse, seminary, and it's hard to explain quickly. But anyway, you had a sheet of paper, and you had to go pull these items. It was a huge warehouse, not the size of an Amazon warehouse, but several football fields. And the best thing was if you had a carton of something. But what really stung was if you needed like one broom. If you were selling like to a really small little convenience store, they needed one broom, they needed one box of Kleenex or whatever. And so what the deal was you only were to take the top sheet. But what I soon discovered was that those who had been there a while, they would wait for the good sheet to come up, and they could take their little cart and go pick up, in 1 or 2 stops, they would have this big order, and I'd be running all over this warehouse trying to pick up a piece here, a piece there, and a piece there. Well, I lost my job. Why? Because I couldn't keep up, but I didn't lose my dignity. So one more, if I will. You've heard it said, love your enemy and you love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father in heaven. In other words, here's the punchline. If you don't take this approach, we are not looking like God. And then he says, God causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the just and the unjust. Oh, don't you hate that? Don't you want to live in the world where the righteous get the blessing and the unrighteous get the curse? See, in Jesus' world, there's no what goes around comes around, right? Oh, I know that's going to grate on us, right? That God's good to bad people. Except that may be the only reason God's good to you. Ooh. See, I think it's funny when we read this, that the sun rises on the evil and the good, and God sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous, we think, well, that's not fair. But what makes you think you're the righteous in the story? See, I'm so glad God decides to give me sunny days and rain, even though I don't deserve it. I've come to understand that the person who does not deserve that I'm a person that does not deserve God's goodness. I'm the person who does not deserve to have the sun and the rain brought to me. If you love those who love you, and only those, what reward is that of you? Even the tax collectors live that way. And if you embrace only your own people, and you receive only your own people, and if you care only about your own people, what are you doing that's any different than anyone else? Don't even the pagans do that? Therefore, as your Father is, so shall you be. So you need to understand that to reclaim your humanity, what you need to step is into the power of love. Love your neighbor and your enemy. You see, we're not supposed to be the people drawing lines between people. We're supposed to be the ones erasing them. And he said, you've heard it said, this is what's going down. This is the wisdom of the street. Love your neighbors, hate your enemy. So you need to know who your neighbor is so you can know who to hate. Jesus says, I tell you, love your enemies. I can't understand. I really can't. Betsy and I, we do this sometimes. We just can't understand the level of hatred that's in our culture. It's not enough that we just have to state our positions with intelligence and passion. You know, we have to demean and destroy the people who don't agree with us. And what Jesus is saying is, if you don't stop this, if they're your enemy, you need to love them and you need to pray for them. Long ago, Jesus knew we were in a mess. Long before the internet came to expose the darkest part of our souls. Long before Twitter and Instagram and social media and Facebook began to reveal what's inside of us. Long before the dark web ever came into existence, Jesus knew that there was a dark side to humanity. So he called us to a new life. A life impossible to live without him. Jesus came to restore our humanity. I am embarrassed as a pastor, as a person who's a follower of Jesus, as a person who's inescapably identified with Christianity. I am so embarrassed about the way Christianity is acted in our culture. And people have identified themselves with Jesus. And I'm convinced that what we're watching is the crumbling of what has been known as Christianity. And hopefully we will begin to see the emergence of a new movement of Jesus. So I invite you to commit and or recommit to be a part of that revolution that Jesus started 2,000 years ago, because he came to reclaim our humanity and to make us human again.